Hi, my name is Tam Hun. I'm the Executive Director of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. 30 years ago, the HHRC helped me overcome cultural barriers that I encountered ever since I was in kindergarten. The work that HHRC does is to encourage all citizens to reflect and act and build a more civically engaged community. I want to personally thank all of those who helped me and to welcome and encourage those new here to discover the programs we have to offer. Come on, let's take a tour. Welcome to the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine, where we're centrally located in the state. We are an interactive educational institution, and one of our current exhibits is called the Walls. Walls can be physical or psychological. They can protect us or separate us, but not all walls are always dangerous. The chosen theme of walls is especially relevant today and is addressed in a variety of compelling ways. Psychologically, we need boundaries to create the feeling of being protected and safe, but taken to the extreme, not only do they keep everyone out, they also keep one locked in. This show explores the many aspects of walls, both physical and psychological. Okay, now let's go to the rotunda. To preserve the oral testimonies of Holocaust survivors and liberators living in Maine, a multimedia installation was developed called Were the House Still Standing, a centerpiece of the Michael Klahr Center. Ooh, let me show you this. In this exhibit, The Holocaust Presence of the Past, photographer Judy Glickman-Lauder says, "My most intense and life-changing photographic experience has been the years I spent delving into the actual sites of the Holocaust period of history." And now I want to show you the atrium. Here at the HHRC, we offer free educational programming statewide. We also happen to have a classroom where we invite students from across the state of Maine and also serves as a place for communities to gather.
Hi, I'm Nick Mills, a member of the HHRC Board of Directors. And along with Tam, our wonderful Executive Director, I want to thank you for all the great work you've done to help us build and grow a civic-minded community, and for your support of our vital educational programs for the past 36 years. Many thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tam Hun, and I am the Executive Director of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine, and I am thrilled to be here with you. I have been part of the HHRC community for nearly 30 years, and tonight is the first time I proudly lead the annual meeting as your Executive Director. Our annual meeting this year is all about community and the many people and their unique voices that collectively make this work possible. We have a wonderful program for you this evening that introduces to you many members of the HHRC board, staff, and community leaders whose work I hope inspires you. Our program takes place in the Michael Klahr Center, home of the HHRC. Before we begin, it is important to acknowledge that we here at the HHRC recognize that the land on which some speakers and myself gather on this evening is the homeland of the Wabanaki tribal nations. We recognize the Indigenous people who occupied this land before us and offer our support and partnership in creating understanding of our shared history. I would like to introduce our first speaker, April Fournier. April is an at-large counselor for the City of Portland and an early childhood specialist case manager for Maine Behavioral Health Care. Welcome, April.
Thank you so much. And good evening, friends. As you heard, I'm April Fournier. I am Diné, a member of the Navajo Nation, an educator, a community health worker, and currently serve on City Council. Thank you so much to HHRC for having me here for such a wonderful event, celebrating the work being done in our community to advance equity, create relationships, and work on building a stronger community for all our relations. I want to start by sharing a few thoughts about what it's like to be Indigenous in Maine, serve in public office, raise children in our community, and occupy this space with this identity in 2021. If you've not already seen this week, there is a viral video being shared broadly of a math teacher in Riverside, California, teaching. Well, I'm not actually sure that she was teaching, but making a spectacle of herself in her classroom, mocking Native dress, ceremony, and storytelling. This was something I expected to see many, many years ago, certainly not something I expected to see in the last few days. There was also a story that came up around Indigenous Peoples Day about a week ago that talked about the Big Indian in Freeport and the new owners of the business and how they didn't see any problem really with keeping it up, even though it's historically and culturally inaccurate, not to mention just another way that we're represented in a dehumanized or characterized way without our consent. My children in school have had incidents where they've had to help their teachers learn how to decolonize language, how to consider another view of history, or how not all of us celebrate Thanksgiving. Consider this of yourself. How often do you say, let's powwow, or what a savage, or that's way off the reservation, or not think twice about national sports teams who not only profit from cultural appropriation, but also perpetuate harm to our peoples? And we have also begun a national effort to discover, reclaim, and return thousands of Indigenous children buried at residential schools around the country after decades of the truth being hidden and forgotten. I'm grateful to HHRC for their collaboration and work on a statement of solidarity for this work and the heavy lift that comes with recognizing and healing from the past. It's not awful, all awful, I promise. We are seeing real change, real progress, and real action to benefit Native peoples across this country. We've watched as the first Native cabinet member was appointed as Secretary of the Interior, putting someone who has such a deep commitment to tribes and our land in charge of the decisions that have the biggest impact. We've seen a cultural explosion with shows like Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls that celebrate living while Indigenous and all that comes with that. We've seen policy changes at the state and federal level and continue to see more attention on the importance of Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination. I'm also incredibly proud of Portland Public Schools and the work the social studies curriculum team has done on decolonizing our curriculum, helping our educators expand their view of whose history we study and what lens we study it through. We are all learning, relearning, and in some cases unlearning in this space that we all share together. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, and it takes a lot of effort, time, patience, and accountability. What is so critical is that we continue to have the hard conversations. We continue to explore what history looks like through multiple lenses, and we continue to hold space for those who have less privilege, voice, or ability to speak out themselves. I'm so glad to be able to walk this walk with you, with this city, and with my community, and I look forward to continuing to work together. Ahi'e. Thank you, my friends, and congratulations on a beautiful year.
April, thank you so very much. It's wonderful to hear the work that's being done and how collaborative that work is taking place. I am thrilled to now present to you Joe Schmidt, who is the acting coordinator of secondary education and social studies specialist for the Maine Department of Education. Joe, welcome.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm very excited to be here. As many of you may have known, we may have met in different work being here as the social studies specialist and also currently the acting coordinator of secondary education for the Maine Department of Education. I'm honored to have been invited to speak this evening. The Maine Department of Education and myself specifically, we are very thankful for the support that the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine has provided, and we look forward to continuing this support in the future. HHRC does such important work in a variety of different ways. There's the programming that they do directly with schools that I've gotten to witness firsthand, hands-on in those classrooms. I've gotten to see educator professional development opportunities right here on site. And then I've also got to the privilege of sharing out the great work of HHRC with the social studies field and all educators across the great state of Maine. Those professional development opportunities here on site are some of the where I really look forward to each year. Every August now, it's been 5 consecutive years where I've been invited to come speak and present. And I think the wide variety of those topics shows the impact that the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine can have on this work. I've been here and participated in talking about anti-bias work, talking about immigration throughout the history of Maine, talking about the diversity of Maine, having educators and other participants talk about civil discourse and how we talk with one another, talking about cultural competencies and the way that we need to have those diverse voices here in our community. And then most recently, again, just this August and the last virtual one, talking about contentious topics and a lot of things that we have in our community and our schools where we have topics that people are starting to be more and more nervous about having conversations about. And so making sure that our educators feel supported in having these conversations. As many of you may know, there was recently passed legislation signed this summer regarding Holocaust and genocide education. The good part is that that legislation now will mean that when we do the next and future social studies standards revision here in the state of Maine, there is a statute for the steering committee to look at. The steering committee is the first step of the standards review, and they review all legislation pertinent to social studies standards. And this would be a new one where they would have to examine and say, how do the current standards look and what would need to change moving forward to be in accordance with this? The steering committee will then provide guidance to a series of teachers or group of teachers who will then usually spend a summer working together, writing the standards that then they will go through the legislative process, hopefully be signed into law with those new components in it. And then that gives school districts a basis to write their curriculum from. So with this new law in place, when we start to see again the next and then future revisions to the social studies standards, we will have that place for that grounding in making sure that Holocaust and genocide education is highlighted and strengthened throughout Maine schools. What we really want to make sure that we focus on, and anytime we bring a topic like this into the standards or into schools, is to make sure we're not just checking the box of saying, yep, understand, done. We've managed to do that, now let's move on. What we really want to make sure is that students make meaningful connections to their learning, thinking about what they need to take away from this learning. What does it mean? How does it impact them both historically and contemporarily? What are the skills to make meaning of this learning? And one of the ways that we really want to make sure that we address this, and we see this in this recently revised standards, is we've highlighted the idea of repeated exposures of content, a spiraling piece. And so as we move forward with genocide and Holocaust education, what we're looking at is not just a one-time piece where students will learn about a series of names or dates, but really it's about understanding repeated exposures in multiple contexts that help bridge those connections in that learning. And again, if you think about the trainings that have been hosted here by HHRC, you see it. It's not just this one approach. It's not just one idea, one piece of learning, but it's talking about Holocaust and genocide education can make these connections to previous summer seminars here around discrimination, bias, immigration policies, people's ability to agree or disagree, understanding each other, celebrating diversity, making connections to current events. It's through this repeated exposure that students, as they continue through their educational career, that will build in complexity that helps students really get an understanding of what we'd hope they walk away with this. So we think about what are those key understandings we want students to get of the Holocaust in that past tense, and then make those connections to the current tense, not only in the Holocaust, but also any genocides going on around the world, again, historically and contemporary. So what would we want students to do? How would we bring it back to life is really the key when we think about the standards piece and the curricular components of Holocaust education. We really believe that it's not a checklist of ideas or concepts that we want to make sure students memorize, but we really want it to be part of a bigger learning where they're making connections. On the Maine Department of Education, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion website, you see that there is a series of how to address this type of work, with Holocaust and genocide education being a part of that triangle. I'm happy to report that a lot of the inspiration of this work came from partnerships and working with here, working with David Greenham a couple summers ago in this work, talking about how it's not enough to have a students bring in a certain component of history, but it's rather about that rigorous content about the topic, in this case, Holocaust and genocide education, but then also making sure that schools are doing thorough reviews of their entire curriculum, making sure that we have the texts, the readings, the primary sources brought to the table so that we hear those stories. And we're also making sure that educators are also doing self-reflections on themselves. And so again, if you go to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion page of the Maine Department of Education, you see the Facing History in Ourselves, the pedagogical triangle, which we've built out in that idea of taking rigorous content about the Holocaust and genocide education, tying it into the curriculum review and development, and then making sure students and staff are getting that self-reflection piece to really deepen their understanding of this work. The Maine Department of Education continues to support this work, and moving forward, we have a series of online modules titled MOOSE, Maine Online Opportunities for Sustained Education. MOOSE is currently in year 2, and in the second iteration of MOOSE, the year 2, we've picked certain topics where we are bringing together teams to do work around this. And one of those topics that we see in MOOSE is regarding Holocaust and genocide education. And again, what you're seeing not only in those standards and approaches to curriculum, but you're seeing in MOOSE is really that PK-12 exposure to an idea, not just a one and done. You're seeing an interdisciplinary approach to making sure it's not just a history piece, but that there's ELA components, there's understanding all parts of a student's education, making connections back into these topics. And it's that ongoing repeated exposure that we call a continuity in education that brings us across time, going in depth, where students will build that deep understanding. So you see the work of the department not only in related to year 2 of MOOSE by highlighting and identifying the importance of genocide education. We currently now have a new statute which will help us guide future standards work. And what we really want to do is just look for those new innovative methods in ways that we can support school districts building a curriculum so that the idea of Holocaust education is not just a lesson, but it's really about building that experience to prepare students to be a citizen of their world. So in conclusion, I want to thank HHRC again, Tam, for the invitation. I'm humbled and honored to be here, not only every year with the teacher workshop, but being given this opportunity to speak to the group. The Department of Education is happy to continue to promote and support the work of HHRC, and we always want to make sure that students are getting that quality, in-depth, sustained education around genocide and Holocaust education. Thank you to everybody, and thank you, Tam and HHRC.
Thank you, Joe, so much for joining us this evening. And it's wonderful to hear the incredible work of the Maine DOE, building this curriculum to deepen those meaningful connections and also having a self-reflection component. I really feel like that gives way for students and teachers to learn alongside of each other to do this very important work. Speaking of teachers, I would like to introduce you now to Heidi Omler. She is a teacher at Ellsworth High School. Heidi, welcome.
Thank you, Tam, and thank you to the Center for the invitation for this evening. So as Tam said, I teach at Ellsworth High School. I've been a public school teacher for a little more than 20 years. And a few years ago, I attended the summer session at HHRC and was introduced to a lot of resources, some of which Joe mentioned, many of which I still use. But above and beyond those resources, I also was introduced to a variety of people that I have continued to be in contact with. One of the most influential being Holocaust survivor Charles Roatmill. And Charles comes and speaks at my school every opportunity that I can give him. And I would certainly consider Charles to be a very dear friend of mine. I actually was just talking with him a few weeks ago. So with that in mind, and I have been very fortunate that I have been able to teach Holocaust and genocide studies as a separate elective. This is my 7th year at Ellsworth High School teaching this elective. And in that class, my students and I were looking a couple of years ago at a survey that had been done. I can't remember if it was the one by the claims conference or not, but it was a few years ago. And basically they were asking college students, and in some cases adults, what their knowledge of the Holocaust was. And as we looked at the results, most of my students were quite shocked. And so we started to talk about, like, how do you fix that? Like, what do you do about it? And most of the kids realized that had they not been taking an elective in the course, that they also probably would not have had that much knowledge. So they decided that they wanted to create a poll for our own students. And so we distributed the questionnaire, and we were quite shocked at the results. And so in the end, the students and I decided that the way to fix this, or at least move towards fixing it, was through some sort of mandatory requirement in the state. So fortunately, at that particular point, we also had a connection with the center because Shenna Bellows was the director then, and she was very helpful. She also testified in front of the education committee with us. The senator that sponsored our original bill, Louis Lucchini, is from the Ellsworth area, as is Shenna. So the students and I and Charles, we all went to Augusta, and the testimony went very, very well. And I think we will probably mark all of time this way. That was pre-COVID. So then COVID hit, and unfortunately, the bill died in committee. So with a new year, a new legislative session, new students, but we approached Louis and asked if we could try it again. And so we did. And so as Joe was saying, the bill passed, and so it will be in 2023 that teachers will be required, along with many other topics in history in the state of Maine, to teach genocide, and the history of the Holocaust. And so moving forward for me, I am very passionate about teaching about the Holocaust. I am just finishing up my PhD in Holocaust and genocide studies. And so for me, I would like to do several things. One being, I really want to help train teachers in the state, not only just with resources, but also in their own education, helping them feel very comfortable. This can be a very overwhelming topic to teach to students. And so moving towards that, I, in the past few weeks, have joined the Moose team that Joe Schmidt was talking about, helping to develop that curriculum for that program through the Department of Education. And then I also have let Louis know that I'd like to be a part of the team of teachers that works with the legislature with the new standards. And honestly, it all comes right back around to the center, because the center is going to be a really integral part of this in helping to provide teachers with what they need. If we don't provide the teachers with the training for themselves, and then the resources that they need, this will not be done in a way that is really going to be the best way that it can be done. So I feel very strongly about that, and I know that the center will be a big piece of that. So thank you again very much. I appreciate the invitation for tonight.
Heidi, thank you so much, and congratulations for almost completing your PhD. That's huge. As you heard from Heidi, she wears many hats, and you might have also heard that she's not only contributing to her school, but to the larger state of Maine. So I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, Heidi. And, we're here to support you in however we can. Next, I would like to introduce Erica Nadelhaft. She is a Holocaust scholar and the HHRC's education coordinator. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you, Tam, and good evening, everybody. Once you've seen the Holocaust, you cannot unsee it. And once you realize where unchecked hatred can lead, you cannot remain unresponsive when you see it in your own community. We know how dangerous not speaking up at the beginning can be. The Holocaust didn't suddenly appear fully formed in the world. It was the horrific end of a long process of anti-Semitism, hatred, and the othering of people who were seen as different and less than. It required the active participation of tens of thousands of ordinary citizens and the passive acceptance of even more bystanders, those who saw and chose to look away or not respond. At every stage, there were missed opportunities to respond and to speak out. As you've already heard, the Holocaust and Human Rights Center is active in Holocaust education in schools throughout the state of Maine. The education of students and teachers is critical, but schools don't exist in a vacuum. Students go home to families who in turn are part of larger communities. Teachers and school administrators answer to school boards, who in turn answer to parents and other community members. And all of these people are part of a broader environment. Educating students about the Holocaust, about hatred, and about injustice and the need to speak up in the face of injustices, both large and small, isn't enough. Students and teachers need the support of their administrations and school boards if they are to do this work. School boards need the support of the local communities. To effect real change, community members need to be involved. They too need education and opportunities to learn to recognize and respond to social injustice. To that end, we have expanded the Holocaust and Human Rights Center's outreach to communities. We're working now with libraries, with senior colleges, with historical societies, with universities, and even with the Maine National Guard to increase awareness not only about the Holocaust, but about anti-Semitism and racism and other forms of social injustice. We're working with groups like these to help them recognize and speak out against injustice that's happening both in their own organizations and in their communities today. When we bring the knowledge and the tools to address hate into communities, we not only strengthen our work in schools, we give students and their teachers partners in the work for social justice. Speaking up against hate is a community endeavor. Many say that it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to change the world. Thank you all.
Erica, thank you so very much. And I could not have said it better. Speaking up in the face of injustice is not enough. And speaking up requires everyone within a given community. Next, I would like to introduce you to Piper Dumont, our Western Maine educator. Piper, welcome.
Thanks. Okay, so I think it's safe to assume that we all think that schools should be safe and welcoming and respectful places for all students. And I can tell you that everyone I worked with as an educator authentically has cared for their students and their well-being. So you can imagine the gut-wrenching feeling when we were doing this sort of social emotional mapping of a school with their third grade. And in every class, students mentioned the crying spot. It's this place in the middle of the playground, but it was semi-obscured, and it's where kids could, and then they did, go to hide away to cry. And the crying spot was as much a part of the students' life at the school as the cafeteria or the bathroom. But the teachers, who were this really engaged and passionate crew, they had no idea. No idea about this place that represented the painful moments in school when you don't feel safe or welcome or respected. Okay, so I bring this up as a metaphor for these kinds of moments throughout one's school experience. Like when closing the door to a bathroom stall only to be confronted with a swastika. Or when a well-meaning white teacher attempts to hold up hip hop by using rap lyrics as a way to explore poetry. And the pain felt by the only Black student in the class having to repeatedly hear white peers use the N-word because there wasn't a conversation about that. Or the third grader who's told matter-of-factly by a peer, Black people don't go to heaven. Or when your classmates, since elementary school, hear your actual given name, the one that was thought too hard for white Americans to remember, let alone to pronounce. They hear that name for the first time when you were called onto the stage to receive your diploma at graduation. And these are just a few examples of Maine students' pain that school staff had no idea about, not because they didn't care, but because we can all miss what we don't know. Almost 80% of teachers in the US are white, yet less than 50% of students are. In Maine, 97% of teachers are white. What are we missing? Because we just don't know. Over 2/3 of LGBTQ plus students in Maine report experiencing harassment in school. Yet half of them never told school staff. What are we not seeing? Maine's young adults were recently found to have relatively high knowledge of the Holocaust compared to other states. Yet 62% of Maine millennials did not know 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And 14% thought Jews caused the Holocaust. There's obviously a lot we don't know. Anti-bias education is a tool to help us all attune to the experiences and perspectives we are less likely to see or to hear, to facilitate spaces where more perspectives can be heard and shared and incorporated, and to help us to better see those semi-obscured spaces, the metaphorical and the literal crying spots of our schools, so that they are safer, more welcoming, and more respectful for all of our students and staff and communities.
Wow, Piper, I'm digesting all of that because that is incredible. To be reminded of who in our community is not fully aware of the Holocaust or even other genocides, and what is actually taking place within our schools, and how we can start thinking about what we are missing, including how we can more facilitate creating spaces for students and teachers and other community leaders to feel safer and to be heard. Piper, thank you so very much. I now want to go ahead and introduce Sage Purser. She is an HHRC board member, and she is also a youth engagement manager for the Wabanaki Public Health. Sage, welcome.
Thank you. Ignash Wanishnash Tusha. Good evening. My name is Sage Purser. I'm a citizen in the Yakama Nation, and I'm a board member of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine. I'm the Neganus Youth Engagement Division Manager at Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness. I help lead the youth engagement efforts within the 5 tribal communities: the Penobscot Nation, Passamaquoddy at Sabayak, Passamaquoddy at Indian Township, the Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, and the Rustic Band of Micmacs. Our goal is to support as many youth as possible to reclaim cultural identity, develop leadership skills, identify and use their voice, and empower them to make positive changes within their communities and beyond. I can't put into words how grateful I am to be here and to be in these roles to help support Indigenous people. As I said in my introduction, I'm a citizen of the Yakama Nation, which is located across Turtle Island in what's now called Washington State. I grew up here in Wabanaki territory, and the reason behind that is a similar story for many Indigenous people. You may have heard in the news about residential or boarding schools where Indigenous children were taken from their families and stripped of their cultural identity as a form of assimilation and genocide. These acts continued, and in many cases still do. My father was taken. He was adopted to a non-Native family as a form of assimilation. This was called the 60s scoop era. I'm 33 years old. This still affects me. I didn't get to grow up in my culture, learn my language, or the traditions. My dad and I met his side of the family when I was 10. But since then, and especially since I began working for Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, I've been strengthening my cultural identity, learning bits of the language and traditions, participating in traditional practices, as well as advocating for Indigenous rights and social justice, which I get to continue at the Holocaust and Human Rights Center. Our stories matter, and they need to be heard. It's evident that there's a need to teach a more robust history. It's essential in creating an inclusive and safe environment for all youth. And the youth I have the opportunity to work with recently shared a social media campaign about misrepresentation of Indigenous people with a specific focus on Indigenous themed mascots and Halloween costumes. That campaign consisted of quotes from the youth about how seeing people dressed up or playing Native affects them. This campaign, led by youth, speaks to the need for more education and understanding from non-Natives. This idea stemmed from their previous work speaking at the Wells Mascot Community Forum and the Skowhegan School Board meetings for the need to change the mascots. A quote from a youth council member that we work with will stick with me. She said this at the Skowhegan Forum. You are Indians for 4 years. We are Indians our whole lives. We know what racism looks like. I hope that one day Indigenous youth will not have to remind people that we are still here and that our stories matter. I'm honored to be able to serve on the Holocaust and Human Rights Center board. I'm thrilled to be on the education committee, and I'm excited for the work that we will do to help guide. I look forward to deep discussion, learning, and growth. We have the opportunity to create a positive change within the education system, in our communities, and beyond, to help support a more holistic and inclusive environment. You've heard of the programs that the Holocaust and Human Rights Center have done, and I'm so excited to be able to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sage, so much. Like Piper, I too am absorbing what you just shared. And I want you to know I heard you and I hear others of youth and they matter. So let's keep trying to tell those stories to those in our community. Next, I would like to introduce Nancy Spiegel, our board president. Nancy, I see some people smiling and eager to see you. So Nancy, welcome. And it might just be taking a moment. Let me see.
Okay, can see myself.
Hi, Nancy. Welcome.
Welcome and good evening, everyone. It took me a while to absorb all the words of all the speakers this evening. First, I would like to begin by thanking our guests, April Fournier, Joe Smith, and Hedy Omar for the participation tonight and all the work they do in our schools and communities throughout Maine. Also, a huge thank you to our educators, Erica Nadelhoff and Piper Dumont, for their dedication to all our students in ensuring we combat prejudice and discrimination. I would also like to thank very much our board member, Sage Purser, for sharing her personal story and commitment to the HHRC. I am so proud to be associated with each one of them. Their passion is incredible, and they are part of the village that can bring change. We began in 1985 by a handful of passionate believers in the importance of Holocaust education and the need to teach the impact of such genocides. Gerda Haas, a Holocaust survivor and a librarian at Bates College with her allies, displayed a strength of leadership and determination in establishing the HHRC, which has continuously grown in reach and relevance. Now, 36 years old, we work in partnership with community leaders, educators, and now the Maine Department of Education, as we collectively are moving our important message forward. This work is so important because the children in our schools today will be the decision makers tomorrow. It is important for them to understand and learn the lessons that are important to their future. We are profoundly grateful for the visionary leadership of Gerda Haas, who passed away this summer. It is wonderful to see that the Haas family is represented tonight in tonight's audience. In the HHRC's early founding, Gerda worked closely with her colleagues and friends, past executive director of the HHRC, Sharon Nichols, and former Maine State Librarian, Gary Nichols. And tonight, Sharon and Gary will pay tribute to Gerda and her legacy.
Welcome, Sharon and Gary.
Hi, thank you so much for the invitation. By way of introduction, I want to tell you that I had the good fortune of serving as state librarian and director of the Maine State Library for pretty much close to 40 years. And I had the great honor of hosting the formative years of the center and its founders. But before I make my remark, I want to share a story with you. In a conversation with Gerda, I revealed something that was a little bit personal. I revealed that I dedicated my every morning run to those Holocaust children who could never do so. And in that moment, Gerda reached out and said, "May I hold your hand?" And in that moment of silence, it was a moment of silence and of peace that I certainly will never forget. There are many grand achievements of Gerda, one of which were her efforts to build and promote the building of a physical center of remembrance and education, which we now have in the wonderful Klahr Center. An earlier one was to engage a director to carry forward the goals and objectives of the board, which was so admirably done by the first HHRC director, Sharon Nichols. What I truly will forever remember most was looking into the eyes of Gerda and seeing compassion, kindness, dignity. And I wonder to this day about her extraordinary positive attitude and love, despite some of the tragic moments of her youth of horror and vicious hatred. She was, to me, a leadership giant in diminutive form. She had a quiet presence, yet an aurora that said, pay attention, listen to me. And we did. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you, Gary. I don't know how I can follow that. I just know that if Gerda could hear the teachers who spoke earlier in the program, she would be so thrilled that her vision to have Holocaust education in the state of Maine is ongoing all these years, and that the education has been so profound that these educators are so passionate and engaging, and you know that they will engage their students. To me, when I remember Gerda, I think of the tiny woman who was kind, very supportive, but had a vision. And it was very difficult to say no to Gerda. And she just seemed to exude kindness. It was her thoughts and vision of having Holocaust education in Maine. But she also realized that to mandate Holocaust education was not the way to go. Not at that time, because we needed many, many educators throughout the state. And all of this happened because of Gerda Schild Haas. In the 80s, when the Fortunoff archives at Yale University began doing Holocaust testimonies, it was Gerda and Carney Burns. And Carney Burns was the first executive director, Gary. I was the second. They had training at Yale, and they began interviewing Maine Holocaust survivors. This went on well into the 90s, and that collection is available at Yale and also at the HHRC. When we began educating the educators of Maine, the teachers, I was also learning about the Holocaust. And Gerda was always supportive. She was inspirational. And she knew that if the Holocaust wasn't taught in the schools, generations of children would grow up not knowing anything about it. And we only have to look at the news to find out what is going on in Texas, where they are supposed to give it an opposing viewpoint. We went all over the state, as far as Fort Kent, Machias, Ellsworth, and now it just seems as though the Holocaust Center has really bloomed, where they are really reaching out to educating more and more teachers. And with this new, I'm not sure what it is called, it's not a law, but it will be included in the curriculum that Holocaust education should be taught in the schools. It is more important than ever that more and more teachers are taught and taught properly about the Holocaust. Also, in thinking of Gerda, she authored 2 books during her life. One was These I Do Remember, Fragments from the Holocaust, published in 1983, and Tracking the Holocaust, published in 1995. I would like to read the dedication of Tracking the Holocaust. What I really like about this book is before every chapter, she gives world views of what is going on in the world, what music was popular, what books are being read, and then in depth, she explains what is going on in her life. It is dedicated to the memory of her family. Her mother, Paula Joxberger Schild, her sister, Elvita Schild, her husband's sister, Paula Haas Meyer, her daughters, Margot and Inga, her husband's sister, Erna Haas Feinstock, her children, Kurt, Ruth, Claude, and Micheline. These I do remember. Gerda was, like most Holocaust survivors, reluctant to speak about the Holocaust in the beginning or her trauma. It was only later that she began to speak. And she did so because she knew it was important. Something else she accomplished. She decided at some point to read all the letters that Rudy Haas had saved from his family from 1938 to 1940. Not only did she read them, she translated them. She did this enormous volume. And I read these letters. I find them inspiring. You can read the hope and desperation of his parents, thinking that they may get to England, asking him, what should I bring? How many suitcases should I bring? Should I bring the big love seat? Not knowing that none of that would ever benefit them. This is dedicated to her children. And I had something marked here, which I have lost. It just fell out. But this is it. I do not know if the Holocaust Center has it, but it's very important to have on the shelves. And I will dedicate it and give it to the Holocaust Center if they don't have it. You give me just one moment. I will try to find that. She dedicates it to her children, Leonard, Polly, Hetty, David. Grandchildren, Benjamin, Yoni, Sarah, and Rafi, Margot and Andrew, Ari, Tally, and Richard, Evan and Jacob. These are days when nothing goes right, when nobody loves me, and there's nothing in the fridge I want to eat. Those are just the right days. to read a few of these letters. Thank you. And Tam, I want to tell you how proud I am that those many years ago, you attended the Diversity Leadership Institute, and now you are the executive director of the center. And I also have to tell you that my grandchildren have attended Diversity Leadership Institutes. And when I tell them I was involved, they really just can't believe it. And it was a wonderful institutes that we did for many years at Bates College. And the Assistant Attorney General, Steve Ressler, and I wrote for a grant for that. And it was created with Mark Dion from the Portland Police Department. So thank you for attending and thank you for all your hard work. And I want to thank these teachers for their passion. It is just marvelous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Gary. Sharon, you just have such a way with words in knowing that you and I were so personally connected many, many years ago. And I'm so grateful to get to know you better, Gary, as well. You know, Sharon, I am just so struck by what you and Gary shared about how we are forever grateful for Gerda's vision and fortitude. I love hearing that she didn't take no for an answer. And I never knew that about her. How wonderful. I couldn't agree more about how engaging our educators are. You would have heard both Erica Nadelhaft and Piper Dumont earlier tonight, and how they have been expanding the HHRC's reach. Again, all of which is made possible by Gerda. Another piece that I'm so sincerely struck by is I'm reminded that the work that Gerda did early on was to preserve the very stories of Holocaust survivors here in Maine. And I love knowing, however, I'm learning for the first time that she did so with her own family. And Sharon, I would love to welcome that gift of keeping that book that Gerda so carefully put together of Rudy's life and journey here to the US, here in the HHRC. Again, I thank you both. I thank you for the Haas family for being a part of this. And I will forever, again, be grateful to Gerda for all that she built and all that we now get to be a part of. In looking ahead to the work that the HHRC does, I want to introduce Jenna Vendel. She is our HHRC board treasurer and also a legislative coordinator. And tonight, in honor of Gerda, Jenna will be introducing our Gerda Haas winner, Grace Valenzuela. Jenna, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tam. It's an incredible honor for me to introduce Dr. Grace Valenzuela as the recipient of the Holocaust and Human Rights Center's Gerda Haas Award for Excellence in Human Rights Education and Leadership. I first met Grace in 2007 when I was working with immigrant and refugee youth who overcame great challenges to graduate from Portland Public Schools. Several of them enrolled in college and discovered their high school experience left them ill-equipped to thrive and caused some of them to drop out. These students were inspiration for Grace to develop a targeted college prep program called Make It Happen to give additional learning opportunities, mentorship, and a continuum of support within the school community for high-achieving multilingual students. Her early work to establish the Multilingual and Multicultural Center connected immigrant and refugee families to much needed services and supports across the district. As a leader, she recruited a diverse, talented team who came from the communities that they served. As Portland Public Schools Executive Director of Communications and Community Partnership, Grace has been a part of transforming the school district and aligning the district work to student and family needs. Her work has enabled the cultural shift needed to make schools a safe, supported space for all students to learn. Her emphasis on family and community engagement has ensured robust participation in school programs and community support for the district's equity work. In short, her work has touched the lives of thousands of students and families in Portland. Her impact on racial equity now spans New England through her work in advocacy on the Nellie Mae Foundation's Advisory Committee. I think about Grace and I think about her leadership as being even more pertinent in today's climate. A recent project she's working on with Portland Empowered brings Black and Asian student voices together to talk about racism and discrimination and build solidarity in support of Black lives and to stop Asian hate. She's one of the few leaders in Portland who can bring community members together on racial justice issues without polarization. Her work renews my hope as more school districts pursue racial equity across Maine. And while Grace has grappled and continues to grapple with tough, complex issues, building community and celebrating with joy are central to her work. When I first moved to the Portland area, she invited me to a celebration of Asian American Heritage Month, where I met dozens of API community leaders in the area. Those who knew her from back in the day know that she can throw a really good party. Her signature fundraising event, Rock Around the World, brought executives, elected officials, school teachers, and families together in celebration of Portland's multilingual community. In summary, Dr. Grace Valenzuela is one of Maine's unsung heroes in the work of racial justice and human rights. Her work has survived and thrived despite turnovers in superintendents, central office reorganizations, and revolving school boards. While Grace has spent decades working behind the scenes, our community, our families, our leaders, we see her. I want to give my heartfelt thanks to Portland Superintendent Javier Botana, Pius Ali, and the amazing team at the Nellie Mae Foundation who shared their thoughts and experiences working with Grace as part of this nomination letter. And I want to thank the Portland Public Schools family for coming out tonight and being a part of this special event. And finally to you, Tita Grace, salamat po. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you very much, Jenna. That was a great introduction and a summary of a lot of things that that I've lost count on in terms of, forgotten what I have done in my life. So thank you very much. And to the rest of the board members of Maine's Holocaust and Human Rights Center, and to the executive director, Tam Nguyen, and her staff, my deep appreciation for this prestigious award. This is such a huge honor. I am humbled to be in the company of some of the previous awardees, Gerda Haas awardees, Tim Wilson, the late Betsy Parsons, Pius Ali, ILAP, and last year's honorary assistant majority leader, House Majority Leader Representative Rachel Talbot Ross, all remarkable and all fierce advocates and leaders on human rights in Maine. I would never have imagined that my contributions were of much significance or even worthy of such an honor. I am also humbled by this recognition, knowing that much of the work that I do, as Jenna explained, is not done alone. It is always in community with passionate and principled colleagues, co-educators, co-activists, students and mentors who are all co-conspirators in the struggle towards social justice, equity, and liberation. This esteemed recognition belongs to them also. A special shout out to my staff at Make It Happen program, a program I established 14 years ago to assist students from refugee and immigrant backgrounds to build competitive academic profiles for college admission. Early this year, the program received the National School Board Association's Grand Prize Magna Award for Equity. Portland Public Schools is the first district in Maine to receive such an honor. I would also like to recognize my superior, Superintendent Javier Botana, a tenacious and courageous leader whose unwavering commitment to equity is like no other. And I'll give additional shout out to my incredible team at the Multilingual and Multicultural Center of Portland Public Schools. This team embodies the heart and soul of Comunitas, community and fellowship, a concept deeply rooted in the Filipino tradition of bayanihan, the spirit of communal unity and cooperation to achieve a particular goal. I will not be an effective leader without their wisdom and their truth. I share this recognition with them. For much of my professional career, as Jenna explained, I have worked with students and families from refugee and immigrant backgrounds. It all started when I worked in a refugee camp to teach English to Southeast Asian refugees in preparation for their resettlement to the United States. When I came to Maine as an immigrant, I'm originally from the Philippines, and got hired to work for Portland Public Schools, I found myself working not only with students from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, but also with others who came as refugees from various areas of the world engulfed in civil war or genocide. There were also students whose families chose to come to the United States as immigrants. And while all these families come from diverse linguistic, ethnic, religious, cultural backgrounds and diaspora journeys, they all have similar aspirations to build a better life for themselves and their children in their new country, and unequivocally to provide their children with good education. Schools and its educators and staff play a crucial role in bringing normalcy in the lives of uprooted families. We are a steady source of support and partners in empowering children to fulfill their aspirations and their potential. The last 2 years, the pandemic shattered what we thought we knew of the needs of immigrant and refugee families, particularly those who are recent arrivals. The needs are complex and they are compounded by limited or absent safety nets, the most critical of which is their immigration status. It is a vital component to the stability of families and their integration in the larger society, and a major determinant in one's ability to access employment opportunities, healthcare, childcare, food security, housing, post-secondary education and training, and these are some of the most basic human needs. In the storytelling tradition of Gerda Haas and her passion for history, I'd like to look back at the origins of international refugee rights and immigrant rights in the United States, and how these policies have impacted the lives of people seeking freedom. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Refugee Rights Agreement known as the 1951 Refugee Convention. It is a centerpiece of international refugee protection. It defines who is a refugee and details the kind of protection, assistance, and social rights they are entitled to receive. It was created as a response to the displacement of people from World War II and limited in scope in protecting people fleeing persecution in Europe. The 1967 protocol removed the convention's geographic and temporal limitations so that it could be applied universally. It became the world's legal and moral compass in addressing one of the most basic of human rights. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, 2010 to 2019 was a banner decade for global displacement, with about 80 million people affected as refugees, asylum seekers, and those displaced internally and abroad. While the number of displaced people in the world has increased, many governments, including the United States, have enforced restrictions on migration. When the US Refugee Admission Program was first established in 1980, we welcomed over 200,000 refugees. In 2020, about 12,000 individuals arrived in the US as refugees, the lowest number of arrivals. Of this number, 43 individuals were resettled in Maine, down from the peak of 625 arrivals in 2016. The significance and impact of the 1951 Refugee Convention on global refugee protection continues to this day, but much has changed in the decades since then. The current global displacement context demand new thinking and perhaps different strategies for refugee rights, including defining the term refugee to accommodate those displaced due to climate change, food insecurity, or non-state sponsored terrorism, such as gang violence experienced by many families from the Northern Triangle in Central America. Structural racism has been built into the US immigration system for generations. It is fraught with xenophobia, racism, and economic exploitation, from beginning with the Nationality Act of 1790, whereby eligibility for naturalization and citizenship was restricted to free white male property owners. About a century later, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 suspended immigration for a specific nationality and made the Chinese people ineligible for US citizenship. The national origin quotas of 1924 favoring Western and Northern Europeans were upheld until the passing of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, which eliminated the quotas and established preference for family relationships. It took 175 years to put an end to race-based immigration policies, but it only took 4 years for the previous administration to gut many of the protections. In fact, cruel, racist, and xenophobic orders were enforced to ensure the advancement of a white nationalist agenda. According to the Migration Policy Institute, the previous administration enacted 400 executive actions on immigration, starting with Muslim travel ban. Those executive actions had an impact on border management, the asylum process, refugee resettlement, immigration courts, deportations and detentions, and created severe social, economic, and safety concerns for refugees and immigrants. Indeed, we see their impact in schools and their ill effects on children's physical, emotional, mental health, and overall well-being. Legal scholars claim that the legacy of the previous administration on immigration policies will be felt for a long time and cannot easily be overturned. The lessons from just the last 4 years demonstrate that rights can be all too easily eroded. To quote Goethe, the only thing that we possess that our forefathers did not is the wisdom of the past. This we must use as our guide for shaping the present and creating a better future. End of quote. Let us not forget the lessons of the past and the most recent past. If we truly believe in our pledge of liberty and justice for all, we should all be vanguards of human rights, of civil rights, of indigenous people's rights, of voting rights, of immigrant rights, of women's rights. There is no room for complacency. Let us be vigilant in guarding against the erosion of humanitarian laws and advocate for US immigration reform that is humane. It is a privilege to be selected for this honor. Thank you very much for this award of a lifetime. I hope to continue to be deserving of this honor and live a life in the spirit and passion of Greta Haas.
Grace, thank you so very much. I am often reminded that this prestigious award is given to so many people before you. And today I really just get to highlight you and your exceptional work. I want you to know, Grace, that you remind me through your work, through your partnerships, that you very much not only value community, but value cooperation. I feel you see people that have gone far unseen and you understand their needs. Thank you so much for echoing the importance of being vanguards of human rights and all rights. And on a very personal note, I want to thank you for welcoming me to the AAPI community in Southern Maine. I feel like I am a part of a much larger community, and very similar to Gerda, this is made possible by you. So thank you. I am now going to introduce Adelaide Solomon Jordan, our Chair of Education Committee and HHRC board member, as well as a biographer and a historian. Adelaide, welcome.
Thank you, Tam. I want to add my personal congratulations to Grace and with receiving the Gerda Haas Award, and it just kind of leads so naturally into my role tonight. We've talked about our educators and what we do in the community and what kind of got it all started with Gerda and with this incredible earned award to Grace. Each year, we have the opportunity to acknowledge what students have actually gotten out of this. So we have our two awardees with us tonight, and they receive awards in the name of Emma Adler at the University of Southern Maine. She's in her first year there. She is receiving the Lawrence Allen Spiegel Award. She's that recipient. And Macy Young, who is a York High School student, and she is receiving the Matilda Schlossberger Award. So each year awards are given, and it's really a reflection of what our work has done in the community. I'm going to let each of these young women share some of their essays with us. And also we are going to make that available so that you will be able to have their whole essays, each of their essays at the end of our program. And Emma, we're going to start with you. She is our Lawrence Allen Spiegel awardee.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with an excerpt that's kind of towards the end of my essay, actually. So I'm currently reading Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, comparing the caste system in America to that of India and Nazi Germany. Did you know that when planning how to segregate the Jews, the Nazis looked to America's example? In fact, in the beginning, they saw America's treatment of African Americans as too harsh for them to go through with. Eugenicists from America aided the Nazis when they were devising their strategy to separate the Jews from the Aryan population. It is strange to think that the Nazis took inspiration from the free country, that the example America provided to the world was not one that it would ever take responsibility for. However, it is precisely this reason that it is so important that the Holocaust is never forgotten, that people remember it and how awful it was, but also how it was inspired not just by hate in Germany. It was not an isolated occurrence. The persecution of the Jews has been going on since the beginning of Judaism. Besides this, it is not isolated to Germany. Jews have been alienated all over the world, even here in the United States. Jews were also targeted by the Ku Klux Klan and discriminated against when trying to escape Eastern Europe. Even during World War II, while the United States was criticizing Germany for its concentration camps, the United States government was setting up internment camps for any people in America of Japanese descent. And I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to stop there.
Well, it's good to know that you have more to say about this. But I think you can begin to see the value of all the work that is done. Macy, we're going to hear from you now.
Hi, thank you. So this is a letter that I wrote to Mayella Ewell, who's a character in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which I hope most of you are familiar with. And she is the character who accused Tom Robinson, the African-American man, who's the protagonist in the story, of rape. So, dear Mayella Ewell, I want to begin by apologizing. I want to apologize because I believe that you will spend the rest of your life saying sorry for unleashing the chain of events that culminated in the death of poor Tom Robinson. Yet no one has ever said they're sorry to you. No one has ever said, I'm sorry that life dealt you such a crappy hand. No one has ever said, I'm sorry that you've had to put up with that horrible father for all these years. You've never heard, I'm sorry that your mother is gone. I'm sorry that you've been forced to grow up much too soon. I'm sorry that you're so incredibly lonely. I'm sorry that we left you all alone. But Mayella, I want you to know that I'm sorry. My name is Macy Young. I'm a girl around your age, and while my life is quite different from your own, I am writing to let you know that I get you. I understand, I know, I feel for you, and I'm sorry. Loneliness, my friend, is an emotion that will drive you to do senseless things. Blinded by loneliness, you made a decision whose consequences landed you in the courtroom of Maycomb. But Mayella, I know the truth. I know that you are not looking for attention. I know that you are not seeking to use the whiteness of your skin as a weapon to strike Tom's own black flesh. No, you simply wanted to be loved. When one stops to consider what limited options you had, the decision that you made was clearly void of evil intent. Why didn't she just tell the truth, they ask. But how could you? How could you tell the truth when the man who had painted your limbs black and blue, the filthy King Ewell, had ordered you otherwise? How could you tell the truth when fear had buried it so far within you that you could not even begin to form the words? The truth is that you couldn't. The problematic consequences of deeming you the villain in this story extend beyond you, Mayella. Those who read your story and see a liar in your place reflect the growing sentiment amongst American society that women lie about being raped. This culturally ingrained suspicion toward rape victims has allowed countless criminals to commit this crime and escape unscathed. It has silenced victims who fear that they would be called liars just as you were. But even despite this sad truth, Mayella, we women have shown that the female spirit cannot be conquered. We are strong. In 2017, when one brave woman spoke out about her experiences with sexual abuse, others found the courage to do the same. Soon, a chorus of millions of female voices from around the world sang the words, "Me too." Soon, in the form of the hashtag #MeToo movement, we had waged a war against sexual abuse and harassment. I wish you could have been there, Mayella. I wish you could have stood surrounded by millions of strong women with fists raised and voices loud. You belong amongst them. You are not only a victim of abuse, but a survivor. You, Mayella Ewell, have real courage. Again and again, you rose with the sun, knowing that your day would be filled with only fear and hunger and loneliness. Again and again, knowing you were licked before you began anyway. That, Mayella, is real courage. You're the bravest person I ever knew. Your friend, Macy Young.
Thank you so much, both of you, both Macy and Emma. And I think you can hear kind of the result of all of the work and effort that goes on by the part of our educators across the state of Maine. And I know you want copies of their speeches, and so we will have them for you at the end of the program. And now to close our program, our president, Nancy Spiegel.
Thank you, Adelaide. I am actually going to jump right in. So just one moment. I'm hearing an echo.
You're okay.
Okay. Is that better? I'm seeing some head nodding. Okay, great. So thank you, Adelaide, so very much. I'm just going to go ahead, and I know that there has been just so much work and so much that has been shared tonight that I also want to invite Megan Ladd, our vice president that also serves on the board of the HHRC. And then, as Adelaide pointed out, Nancy Spiegel, our board president, will close. Megan, welcome.
Thank you, Tam. The HHRC's mission statement reads as follows. The Holocaust and Human Rights Center of Maine promotes universal respect for human rights through outreach and education. Using the lessons of the Holocaust and other events, past and present, we encourage individuals and communities to reflect and act upon their moral responsibilities to confront prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination. In order to honor our mission statement and to walk the walk, the board has incorporated a segment relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion into our monthly meetings. This DEI and anti-bias work is especially meaningful to me. As a transgender person, I have experienced what it feels like to be othered in our society just for being who I am. There have been moments of fear and humiliation, but there have also been times of compassion and opportunities for sharing and breaking down barriers. Erica and Piper have led us through some terrific exercises and discussions, which have covered, among other things, internal versus external bias, invisibility, and approaches to talking about topics with those who have an opposing viewpoint. And as a quick aside, if you ever get the chance, ask Erica to share her wonderful story of the time she presented a session on this to the National Guard. These discussions have, at times, been challenging and emotional, but they have brought us closer together as a group, and they have given us tools for fulfilling the second part of our mission. It has also given me a deeper understanding and appreciation of the work the HHRC does. In the video shown at the start of the meeting, Tam talked about the walls exhibit. The HHRC is building walls of resistance as it confronts bias and ignorance. An example is the press release condemning the invoking of Nazi Germany by a state representative. Through its outreach and education, the HHRC is also helping to tear down walls and instead build bridges to communities where people can live authentically and share their whole selves. I personally know how important it is to be able to do so and how vital this work is. If you feel the same, I hope you will consider including the HHRC in your charitable giving. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Megan, for sharing your personal experiences with us tonight and how vital this work is for us and for everyone. To all, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate with us another year. We want to acknowledge all who participated tonight and to encourage you to take this opportunity to participate our mission. You will be receiving correspondence from us, and we are hoping you will support the HHRC's free educational programs on the Holocaust, understanding and confronting bias, and human rights. These programs are offered throughout the state of Maine, in your community and in your schools. And I want to thank you, Tam, for making it possible for us to share the HHR story with all of you. Good night and stay well.